Owney the Mail Pouch Pooch by Mona Kirby. Pictures by Lynn Baroshk. In the year 1888, on a cold, rainy October night in Albany, New York, a straggly terrier mutt wandered through the empty streets looking for a place to get out of the rain. He was so skinny his ribs stuck out. At the post office, the back door was opened a crack, and the dog squeezed inside. The room was warm and dry. He came to a pile of canvas bags. He sniffed around until he found just the right spot, where he circled twice, curled up, and went to sleep. The next morning, workers found the mud on the small pouches. He gave a mean, low-pitched rumble. The men talked to the dog and asked him his name. The mutt glared. He sniffed, but he didn't bite. He seemed to like the smell of their blue wool uniforms. Days passed. The dog didn't leave, and no one came looking for him, so the men cleaned him up and gave him a name. They called him Owney. Owney settled in at the Albany post office. He patrolled the mail room, nosing out trouble. Rats and cats didn't stand a chance. He supervised the men as they sorted and bagged letters. Different men took Owney home, thinking that he might want a family, but Owney wasn't interested. Each time he made his way back to the post office and to his mail pouches. In the afternoons, when the men loaded the outgoing mail on the wagon, Owney stood guard. Then he hopped aboard for the ride to the train depot. With his ears up and his nose to the wind, he was alert to any danger. Once, when the men returned to the post office with the incoming mail, they discovered they were missing a mail pouch. What's more, Owney was missing too. One man headed back to the train depot. He found the missing mail pouch. Owney was sitting on top of it. But when the man tried to get the bag, Owney growled. He showed his teeth and refused to give it up. The worker was out of uniform, and Owney was not about to turn over the government property to just anybody. The man raced back to the office, where he grabbed a canvas bag and located a friend in uniform. Together they went back to the depot and found Owney still guarding the U.S. mail. The men walked slowly up to Owney. He sniffed the bag. He sniffed the legs of the blue wool uniform. He lowered his ears, wagged his tail, and hopped off the pouch. After that, his pals bought him an official-looking collar with a tag that read, Owney, Post Office, Albany, New York. A few weeks later at the depot, as the train started pulling away, Owney chased after it. Running lickety-split, he leaped and landed in the mail car. The Albany men were sad. The train crew waved their hats. They were glad to have Owney aboard. All the way to New York City, Owney sat in the open doorway, seeing new sights and sniffing new smells. The Albany postman looked for Owney on the next train from New York, and the next, and the train after that. Days and weeks went by, but Owney did not return. Several months later, the Albany postmen were at the train depot when, lo and behold, Owney jumped off the mail train. His friends asked him where he had been, but Owney just wagged his tail. After that, the men tied a note to his collar. Dear Railway Postman, Owney guards the U.S. mail. Will you let us know where he has been? Please attach your depot tag to his collar. It wasn't long before Owney hopped another train. Next time Owney showed up in Albany, he had so many tags hanging from his collar that he could barely lift his head. The postal employees tried to remove some to make his load a little lighter, but Owney didn't like that. He growled. So his pals bought a harness that stretched across his back and around his chest. They spread his silver and brass medals all over his body instead of under his neck. This made it easier for Owney to walk. He liked it fine. Owney took off again, crisscrossing the country on the mail trains. He visited New York City, Brooklyn, Boston, and Augusta, Maine. He saw Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Fort Wayne. He traveled to Chicago, St. Paul, Duluth, the Dakota Territory, Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. In Texas, he inspected Fort Worth, Waco, San Antonio, Houston, and Galveston. He hopped a train to Denver, Kansas City, Omaha, Memphis, New Orleans, Key West, Washington, D.C., and Baltimore. And Owney stopped at all the small towns in between. Some say he even inspected the trains and depots in Alaska, Canada, and Mexico. Owney guarded the mail and the men in their blue wool uniforms. If a railroad man fell asleep when it was his time to pitch out or pick up a pouch, Owney barked him awake. In those days there were lots of train wrecks, but no train ever had an accident when Owney was on board. Railroad crews called him a good-luck dog. Owney not only picked up tags from the railroad postman, he also collected trinkets and coupons. Some read, "To his dog ship. Owney call again. Good for 25 cents in future at S.A. Rathbun's Dry Goods, Pontiac, Illinois. 1 quart of milk at Nashville, Tennessee. Good for 1 drink or cigar from H.G. Fitz at Reno, Nevada." Owney didn't smoke cigars, he just wanted the trinket. He loved the jingling sound of his medals when he walked. Not everyone welcomed Owney. In Montreal, Canada, the dog catchers threw him in the pound. Then they wrote to the postal employees in Albany and demanded $2.50. Owney's pals paid the fine, and Owney was put on the next train home. No dog worked harder for the U.S. Postal Service. In 1892, Owney greeted the Republicans at their convention in Buffalo, New York. In 1893, he met with the Iowa bankers in Council Bluffs, Iowa. In 1895, he welcomed the chicken farmers at the Tacoma, Washington Poultry Association. But Owney was beginning to slow down. He was at least 8 years old, which is old for a dog, especially one that has spent a lifetime jumping on and off trains. His friends decided to give him a trip around the world by mailboat. He had his own suitcase with a blanket, comb, and brush. Before Owney could travel, his pals had to make up a new mailing rate. They called it Registered Dog Package, and they attached his note to his harness. To all who may meet this dog, Owney is his name. He is the pet of 100,000 postal employees of the United States of America. Treat him kindly. On August 19, 1895, Owney boarded the steamship Victoria in Tacoma, Washington. Since the mail was in no danger of falling off the boat, Owney didn't have to spend all his time supervising. He chased rats, and in the afternoons he curled up on a mail pouch. In a way, he was still doing his job. When the ship arrived in Japan, the customs officials didn't know what to do with a traveling dog. They issued Owney an imperial passport with restrictions. He was not allowed to ride a horse to a fire. He could not rent a house. He could not scribble on buildings. Owney obeyed. After all, he was a U.S. postal employee. From Japan, Owney went to China and then on to Hong Kong. While his shipboard pals rode in rickshaws, Owney followed behind, keeping an eye on everything. He sailed up the Suez Canal, but he didn't get to stay long enough in Egypt to see the pyramids. He sailed into the harbor of Algiers on the Mediterranean Sea and then to São Miguel in the Azores Island in the Atlantic Ocean. And finally, he arrived in New York City. Owney finished his world trip in his favorite way, by train. On December 29, 1895, he arrived back in Tacoma, Washington. His trip lasted 132 days. He wore 200 new tags, trinkets, and ribbons. He had gained 6 pounds. In 1896, at the San Francisco Dog Show, surrounded by fancy-looking dogs and their fancy-dressed owners, 2 postal employees stood at attention. One wore a blue wool uniform, the other his natural fur. The judge presented Owney with a medal, greatest dog traveler in the world. In the spring of 1897, when the National Association of Railroad Clerks invited Owney to their convention in San Francisco, he took one last trip. By now he was missing some teeth and blind in one eye. Stiff-legged, he could no longer catch a moving train. In the huge auditorium, the curtains opened. Owney walked to the center of the stage. He was slow, but he still jingled with every step, and his shiny tags sparkled in the spotlight. The crowd leaped to their feet, roaring. For 15 minutes they cheered, clapped, and whistled. After that, there was only one thing to do. Owney had to retire. His pals sent him home to the Albany post office, where his career as a mail dog had begun. He was given plenty to eat and a soft mail pouch where he could curl up and fall asleep. Sometimes on those long sleepy afternoons, his nose twitched and his paws quivered. Maybe Owney was dreaming about the good old days of running lickety-split to catch a train and traveling the world. Owney was a great dog. Here he is at work, looking responsible and fierce as he guards 4 railwaymen and the mail. He was so famous that most of the major newspapers in the 1890s reported on his travels.